Hello, lovely people, and welcome back to yet another episode of Bad at Magic, a podcast where we talk about how we're not good. And that's okay, because who likes being good? I don't.
That was a poetry slam intro.
It was. I liked it.
Little tap on the drum for you. There you go.
Do a little golf clap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about this week, Chase?
This week, we are going to be talking about the evolution of our decks and kind of how they have evolved over time. How, what our first few decks kind of looked like, what they look like now, why we changed them, reasons and shenanigans of the sort and such like that.
And hopefully there is some nugget of advice or nugget of just clarity that might help you in refining your decks or burning down the house and just restarting from scratch, because it turns out all along you didn't like your decks anyways, and maybe you'll find something here that you do like and you do grasp onto, because I know this is something that like I go through like every expansion or like every other expansion. It's just
Mhm.
I aggressively Marie Kondo my decks. Like
Yeah.
I only keep decks together that outright spark joy, and
Mhm.
I feel like I'm constantly grabbing and playing. I don't want a deck to just sit there and collect dust. So
I'm really glad you said that because I very much admire the people who have 15 decks, 12 decks, 20 decks. I
can't do
admire
it.
you. I admire you. I don't stick to a number where I'm like, I am only allowed to have this many decks. That's not what I do. But I find myself naturally sticking to around six
Yeah.
ish. Six. I never go past six. And that's not because I'm like, okay, six and I'm done. It's just I find that my attention span can handle six, and then I kind of fall out of love with another deck and I kind of take it apart. And it's a very interesting process doing that, because like I do that if I don't reach for a deck as much anymore, or if I don't really enjoy playing it, or it kind of gives me a weird fuzzy like brain feeling. I'm like, I don't really want to play it anymore. I'll sell it to my LGS, keep the parts that I feel like might be good for other decks, and then just
Build
wait for
something new,
something else.
try again.
Yeah, yeah, literally.
Yeah. I will try to rework a deck before taking it apart. Like
Mhm.
I'll do surgery on it and figure out, okay, like this is what I didn't like about it, and I'll try and cut that out
Mm.
and then like splice something new into it. But
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't work. I always have a Saskia deck built, but this is the first time in a while where I haven't had one put together that I've enjoyed.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting because when I first started to get to know you as a person, you were like the Saskia person. Like
I
that was your
still
thing.
am. There's nothing that really stands out to me right now. Like I feel like I've done it all at this point. And I've done things with Saskia that you just shouldn't do or
Um,
shouldn't be able to do.
I've done things I'm not proud of.
I have a specific set of skills that allows me to create Saskia decks that shouldn't exist. And they're tons of fun, but they're tons of fun like 4 times, and then I'm done with it. So I'll go on
Yeah.
and I'll build the next thing and the next thing. Like I've done everything from like Wild Pair, which is like the deck that started it all. Jim keeps his Wild Pair deck together, but Jim is the type of person who's got a bunch of decks built and
Mhm.
engages with deck building and playing his decks in a lot more healthy of ways than we do.
Yeah.
So, it's cool for him to keep that together. And that's a deck that like constantly evolves because there's constantly new sevens that get printed.
Yeah.
Like every set always gives you like 4 or 5 new cards to evaluate.
There's always something new that kind of
hmm
draws the eye.
The deck is literally built around hyper specific tutors. So
Yeah.
you are kind of pushed in a certain direction to play it a certain way, or the play pattern just it's very repetitive and linear. Like, oh, I'm always going and grabbing Greenbelt Rampager. Oh, I'm always going and grabbing Aurelia the War Leader. You're constantly told to grab certain things.
Well, that's why I took apart my shrines deck. Like I
hmm
literally had a shrines deck. I fell in love with it because at first you were able to like it would play the same and yet it would play differently each time. Like there's enough shrines now that you get an interesting kind of game experience. But after like the first 3 games, that novelty wore off and I just felt like I kept doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that just got very boring to me. And as much as I appreciated the deck a lot and the theme, hyper specific themes like that, I can't do anymore. It's why I don't do is why I don't do sort of like, theme decks with like angels or elves or goblins. It's like they're fun and they're cool, but after a while I get very bored because they play the same way every single time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever built a deck built around a specific creature type except for
Mm,
dragons. And that's just
yeah.
because I wanted to have a good deck that I could bring to events that was like it was safe and it was fun to lend out to people. Like, oh, this is a dragon deck. If
Yeah.
you've never played a dragon deck, like this is just a fun one to give a try.
Yeah.
And who's not gonna like playing just a fun dragon deck?
I think
But
it
I
just
don't really play it myself.
Well, I think those kinds of decks are very good for new players, like
Hmm.
introing them into Magic because those types of deck strategies are very, I think, good to grasp and easy to grasp onto as a newer player. Like if you're either within your first year of Magic or it's like your first week of Magic. I think those kinds of decks are easier to pick up because the synergies are so strong and they introduce a lot of things that I think after a while, when you become a little bit more seasoned, I think it becomes a little less exciting because if you're consistently able to do the thing, then it gets kind of, for me personally, I like to struggle. I like a deck building challenge. I like to choose something where it's not like, you know, a leads to B leads to C consistently every time.
Hmm.
But that's just me. I'm very weird. I'm kind of a what is it, masochistic with my deck building. I
Something
don't
like
know,
that.
something like that. I know that word from the Twilight novel. If I used it wrong, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I know I could switch the commander in the Dragons deck from Tiamat to something else
Yeah.
like Okagachi or something.
Or was it Ow? Is that the 5 mana one that's like white or whatever?
Yeah,
Am I
that's
right?
mono white.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
There's only so many like 5 color dragon commanders that you can pick, and I think more fun isn't necessarily the most exciting. Um, Whereas Tiamat allows a new player or something like that to, flip through the deck. It's like, oh, this dragon looks cool, or
Mm-hmm.
Miram's awesome. I've always wanted to play Miram, so I'm going to search for that and get that in my
Mm-hmm.
hand. It's not something that I find myself grabbing. Like if we're playing on stream or something like that,
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to play that deck. I'll
Yeah.
do it if people want me to, but
Yeah.
if it's not my first choice. And like that's usually a sign that I should take a deck apart or make changes
Yeah.
to it. But
Yeah.
I can't bring myself to make changes to this deck or take it apart for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
I'm starting to feel that way, and I'm a little concerned because I don't want to feel this way about this deck. But I'm starting to feel that way about my Alibu deck because I love my Alibu deck. It's very sentimental to me. It was one of the first deck building streams I did where I feel like I kind of helped shaped a little bit of how an Alibu deck is supposed to look. Because I feel like I was one of the first people to brew it, like when it was previewed, and we kind of got something like shaped with like infect and grafted exoskeleton and stuff. I'm not saying that I like completely like built it and whatever, but like I feel like I had a very larger part in it. And then I played it on extra turns and I won with it on extra turns. So it's very sentimental to me in that regard too. But like I find myself gravitating towards it less and less. And I'm not sure why, because it doesn't fit with that thing we talked about where, oh, it plays the same, because it doesn't. It's very much, yeah, you scry, but it's still, there's a level of randomness to it. And I don't have any tutors in there to my knowledge at the moment.
That deck scries like 15 cards at a time.
Yeah, yeah,
That's like basically a tutor. It's just a tutor for the top 15 cards of your deck. You
yeah,
know, it is deceptively consistent.
yeah,
And because it's very, column A, column B, column C in terms
yeah.
of like its combos and synergies, that combined with, you know, so many scries and so much card draw and so much synergy it is going to feel linear and consistent at a certain point.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think a really great contrast in that is like look at my Elminster deck. That is a deck very focused on scries, but you can play it in multiple ways. Like the
Yeah.
scries aren't just like okay, I'm gonna put whatever into my hand next turn and play big spell. You can do that, but sometimes I want to make fairy dragon tokens with that, or sometimes I want to cast an expropriate that's 2 mana. Like you can do these things in different ways with Elminster,
Mm-hmm.
because the way that he is written, he's a very dynamic commander. He can go one way or he can go the other. Whereas I feel like with Alabu, it's like pretty linear in that regard. I don't know. It's kind of a thing I've noticed with my decks.
So would you say Elminster has turned into what you wish Alabu would be?
I would say no because Elminster plays out so differently than Alabu. There's the same basic concept of like scrying there that I really appreciate, but
Mm-hmm.
Alabu feeds that non-combat damage that kind of nurtures my soul because I really like playing red. I really like non-combat damage. Elminster makes me play, I would say, more smart. I feel like I can kind of play Alabu in a loosey goosey way, you know, and I can still like I can be invested in the game, but I don't have to be laser focused in. But with Elminster, I feel like I have to be laser focused in because there's a lot of different cogs that I have to pay attention to, not just on the board around me, but also with how many scries do I have? How many activations of Elminster do I have? Am I able to cast this expropriate and also cast this Aminatu's augury? Can I get 2 times as many fairy dragons as I wanted to with an anointed procession? Can I?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like there's a lot of different things. Whereas with Alba, it's like move sideways, swing, stack my deck, wait for the next turn, play the card I stacked my deck with, move sideways, swing, so on and so forth. So I feel like they're just two different things, but they're focused around the same thing. I think that's why it's a kind of a good example. Is one is very one allows me to kind of be more chill with my presence in the board state, whereas the other one really isn't. Because like with Albo, I run like a million mana rocks, so I don't have to worry about recasting
Yeah.
Albo. I can just do that and be fine. You know?
Versus Elminster, that's a planeswalker, so there's a little bit more of an investment in
Yes.
keeping it protected and keeping it doing the thing. I was just thinking you play cards like long term plans and Approach the Second Sun. So you
Yeah.
not only are you stacking your deck, but you're stacking your deck like 3 cards down or like 7 cards down
Yeah.
very specifically. So you are planning like 2 or 3 turns in advance on
Yes.
top of what you're doing in the moment, or on top of those decision trees to either cast the big spell or make the dragons instead. Like
Yeah.
every decision has more than 2 options to it versus some of these decks. And I have the same deck. I have the same style of decks too, where it's very black and white versus shades of gray with all of
Yeah.
your decisions.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot with it. And I feel like when we look at the comparison of like Alabu and Elminster specifically, again, not to beat this horse dead, but like with Alabu, if Alabu gets removed, I can just recast Alabu for really cheap because again, I have all those mana rocks, but I don't even have to swing with Alabu to get Alabu's ability to trigger. It's just any artifact creature. Whereas I need to have Elminster in order to do the thing. So one deck is very reliant on me kind of playing smart and having that commander. The other one, I don't even need to swing with the commander to get the value. It just
Mm-hmm.
does it. As long as I have one artifact creature that can swing and everything else is tapped, I'm fine. I'm winning. I'm doing something. I'm gonna hurt, face, stack my deck, do whatever. But I feel like that's something interesting that I kind of just noticed too. Is one is very dependent on the commander, and the other one is to a certain extent. But I don't even need to do the thing with the commander to do the thing.
I've always been the type of person. Like I want my decks to feel like they're that commander's deck. Like I don't want it to feel like I can switch it out for any other commander and
Mhm.
have it feel the same or have it do the
Yeah.
same thing. I want my Saskia deck to feel like a Saskia deck. I want my dragon deck to feel like a dragon deck. I'm trying to think of the decks that I've had over the years, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of Saskia decks.
There is a lot of Saskia because you're the Saskia guy.
I am. I'm. I'm going to my Mox field right now, and I'm looking
Yeah.
at the decks that I've had over the years, and it's like Saskia, Saskia, Saskia. Okay, here's an actual good example. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, I had and I gifted this deck last year or earlier this year to Corey. I had a
Yeah.
Halana Elena deck.
I remember that deck.
I love that deck so much. It was the best $40 deck I've ever made. Did not play like a $40 deck, but it really felt like a Halana Elena deck.
Yeah.
You knew like, okay, this deck has a very focused premise. It doesn't need the commander to do the thing, but when the commander is out there present and affecting the game, you really feel the impact. I like building decks where Halana Elena feels like a Halana Elena deck. Anafenza humans feels like an Anafenza humans deck, and
Yeah.
so on and so on. Versus, and I've been very vocal about my opinion on like the partner mechanic versus just picking any two Abzan color combination of creatures and doing that for partners, or just doing like Tana Rograk for partners and Halana Elan and stuff like that. I want that commander to feel like it's there for a reason rather than just there for the colors. So
Yeah.
if I'm struggling with focusing a deck's identity, I will try and switch the commander, or I will try and make that commander more synergistic with the strategy.
Hmm.
Either it's a payoff for the strategy or it's the setup for the strategy. Uh, and I know Saskia. A lot of people look at Saskia and she's like, oh, she's just there for the four colors. No, there's a lot of cool, intricate things that you can do with Saskia because of the
Yeah.
trigger that you have experienced with your Sisay deck,
Yes.
uh,
Yes, I
with the
have.
way that she interacts with Gisela.
Yeah, that's my win
It's
con.
it's a life changing experience.
Yeah. Be able to deal double damage and then quad it essentially
Hmm.
is kind of amazing. And I love that.
And like you can play like a generic quote unquote like four color beatsy deck with Saskia, but you can have these extra cards in there like your Gisela, like your infect cards or your lifelink cards, and like get the extra synergy out of her trigger to make
Yeah.
that Saskia deck feel like a Saskia deck because her trigger is doing extra for you.
Yeah.
um, Whereas you could just pick Tana Timna or like Bruce Tarl and Ikra Shadiki instead. Like you
Yeah.
could do that.
When it comes to partner, I kind of agree with that. I like partner with. I like backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
because I think backgrounds should have been the way that it partner should have been implemented originally. Because there's just a good balance to it, particularly with if your commander is out, then your background is essentially if your commander's not out, I should say, then your background is essentially useless. And I like that. It's just there.
Yeah.
But I also like that your background counts with commander tags, counts with stuff like Fury Storm, counts with stuff like if someone steals your commander and you have a background, that background technically does follow that commander. I like
Mm-hmm.
that. I think that's fun. But I would agree about that with stuff like that.
With background in particular, I like that they're hyper specifically written and like
Yes.
very
Yeah.
niche in terms of what they do.
Yeah.
So if I did want to make a change to that deck, one of the biggest changes that I could make to a background deck is just switching the background.
Yeah.
And there's like what, eight or 10 different backgrounds for each color,
There's
I
a
want to say,
lot.
or
Yeah.
enough that you have a variety of decisions that you could make to make a change to the deck.
Yes.
If say you didn't vibe with, I think the black one of the black ones is called Haunted One.
Haunted one, you have Cultus of the Absolute. That's
Yeah.
another. I mean,
I
there's a
know
lot
like
of
those two are like the really popular.
yeah.
um
Haunted one's amazing because it gives your stuff undying, and it's good for those theme decks. Cultus of the Absolute is just good to just make your commander kind of big and scary, with an interesting ward cost that I think is kind of fun. There's just like a lot of different ways that you can build those kinds of decks that you wouldn't be able to do necessarily, I think, with like partner.
if I just didn't want to take the easy way out, quote unquote, and just pick the objectively like best background,
Mm.
uh, I have that option, and that'll fundamentally change the way that my deck is played. Maybe I enjoy the challenge of making a different background work with
Yeah.
the same 98.
I'm really glad that you said that specifically because we were literally talking about this before we started recording because I was pouring through my secret layers that I got from the 30th anniversary countdown drop, and I was talking about how I was thinking of taking out the Elspeth. I think it's what Elspeth Knight Errant in
Mm-hmm.
my Sisay deck. And the reason why I want to take it out is because I actually feel like it makes the deck too linear. Because at first I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna take Elspeth out because she makes me win automatically. And you're like, how? And I was like, well, Elspeth is a 4 mana creature. I can get pretty consistent because I run a lot of creatures that are multicolored in this deck.
Yeah.
So I can pretty consistently hit the threshold of 5
You,
for Sisay to tutor for that 4 drop, which will take Elspeth from a 5, not Elspeth, but takes Sisay from a 5 to an 8 because Elspeth has a +1 ability that gives a target creature 3/3. So that makes Sisay an 8 power toughness creature, which allows me to tutor for Gisela, which is one of my main win cons in the deck. And that gets boring after a while. It's the objectively good play, but it's boring for me to do that objective good play so consistently. I've noticed that I almost want to take it out just so I don't have access to it anymore.
and that brings up a very interesting point. Like you've cited two examples of two, good cards to go get.
Yeah.
And sometimes you only have a replacement for one of them.
Yeah.
So how do you make the decision to cut one card versus another? Because like you said, Gisela is one of the main ways that you win the game.
Yeah.
And just based on how your deck is built, there's not really a lot of ways for you to find win conditions because you're inherently limited with your card pool.
Yeah.
And you want your Sisay deck to feel like a Sisay deck. Like there are very few secret lair legends that you can find as a win con. So
Yeah.
you're almost correct in saying in fact you are correct in saying it's actually Elspeth that's supposed to get cut here, not
Yeah.
Sisay. Or sorry,
Yeah.
not Gisela.
Gisela. Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people might say, oh, you cut the Gisela. Well, if you cut the Gisela, how is that deck actually going to win from there?
Yeah.
It gets a lot harder. You need a lot more stuff to make up for the fact that you don't have a Giselle. And that's a completely different, like, tangential conversation of, that's actively powering down the deck. Maybe a deck is too powerful, but
Hmm.
you want to show with this particular deck that a secret lair exclusive deck can be a powerful deck. So
That's something I definitely want to do, but I'm really glad that you highlighted of like which one do you take out, Gisela or Elspeth. But like when you look at Sisay, you already have such a powerhouse in the command zone because she is a tutor, which is
yeah,
why I really appreciate
you
her.
get any card that you want at all
Yeah,
times.
essentially. But here's the deal. Sisay in itself, she is very limited because she can only go up naturally by herself by 5. She hard stops at 7, meaning I can only get creatures with mana value 6 or less, which I really like because a lot of my quote unquote powerhouse cards are 7 or 8.
7, 8, yeah.
Yeah, like I have we talked about Gisela. I have a Chroma in here for
She's an
funsies
8,
because
yeah.
I like her. I like her. And sometimes with Elspeth, I will get a Chroma because it's fun because I can get her up to 9 if I have like that Ajani out that gives a counter on my stuff. But like I feel like with having a tutor already in the command zone, that is such a powerhouse in itself that to kind of you know on turn 4 get like a 7 drop onto the battlefield. It's not even cast, it's put onto the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, it's there. That just feels kind of gluttonous to me for my own play style. That feels like I feel like there's a difference between something being super powerful and something being very linear. And I think this is a really interesting cross section between those 2 points because it is only as powerful as I build it. This deck
Yep.
is only as powerful as I wish it to be because I literally have the option to get whatever I want whenever I want in the command zone.
I mean, that's any deck in general, but that sentiment is just amplified by the fact that Sisay is Sisay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because like there's a lot of commanders out there like Yisan, Tiamat, just basically any legendary that says search your library for
Oh,
something
yes.
is
Ugh.
just gonna inherently change the deck building process or your sentiment
Yeah,
towards a deck in general. Um,
exactly. With Tiamat, I would get the same what like Tiamat gets 5. I would literally get the same 5 dragons every time I play Tiamat.
you go get Miram, you go get Old Gnawbone, you go get Klauth, and
Ancient Copper
then
Dragon for me, I would get Ancient Copper
yeah,
Dragon.
I get Dragonlord Kolaghan because it's a haste enabler.
Yeah, Cloud is great.
Yeah, that deck is amplified in the fact that I run Hunting Grounds.
Mm,
So not only am I getting 5 dragons to hand, but if I have 7 cards in my graveyard because of the threshold effect,
yeah.
if an opponent casts a spell, I just put that card into play.
Mhm.
So not only am I getting those cards to hand, but they're consistently getting dumped into play. And that's a very fun, riveting experience for someone who's never experienced that before.
Yes.
But it's too cool and too not fun for me not to play it
Yeah.
for someone else's sake. Whether you've never played against a Hunting Grounds deck before or whether you're a new player and have never seen this card from like 1997,
Yeah.
like it's it's proof that there are diamonds in the rough from the mid to late 90s in terms of Magic cards, because most most
1000%.
most commander cards that we see nowadays are all new cards.
Yeah, there's some good sleeper hits. I will always live and die by Douthie Embrace as being one of my favorite ways to make a creature unblockable, because it's a repeatable enchantment that gives your creature shadow. And I think out of all the new cards we have got recently in recent printings, there's only been one shadow creature printed recently. And I think that was Douthie Voidwalker, I want
Hmm.
to say.
Yeah,
And do you see that often? I don't.
it's a very intense card, and I feel like the tables that we play at tend to not play effects like that, which is why we
Yes.
haven't really seen it. But if you play like CEDH, or if you play like very cutthroat casual, then it's very, very common to see that.
Mhm.
But you're playing it for the text box. It just happens to also have shadow.
Yeah. It's a
So I,
little
I think
added
that's part of it
bonus.
too.
Yeah.
Are there things that you did long ago that you just don't do with your decks anymore? Like how you've evolved as a deck builder rather than as like a player in general? I know this is a little bit more like nuts and bolts, but I
Yeah.
I, I can definitely think that I have fundamentally changed as a builder.
Mhm.
Just like leaving out certain cards over the years that I used to say I can't build a deck without this card.
Yeah. For me, it's a little weird because the answer is like, yeah, there's some things. I so I used to be like a stark like before I build anything, I'm gonna go to EDA track and see it. I don't do
Hmm.
that anymore. Um, I don't um I don't typically just grab the first thing that someone tells me and run it anymore, because I used to be like, hey, what should I run in X list in my whatever list, and they would say, "Oh, you should run Fire Servant." I'm like, "Okay, I'm running Fire Servant." Duh. Like I don't know. For me, it's weird because I'm more personal with my deck building process.
Hmm.
I really try to look at things from multiple different angles if I can. I really don't. I'm not as knee jerk as I used to be. Like my first ever commander deck was a Niv Mizzet Firemind. Why was it a Niv Mizzet Firemind, you ask? Because when I first learned about what commander was, I walked into my LGS. I looked at the owner, Dale. Hey, Dale. Shout out, Dale. And I was like, what is the strongest commander? And he looked at me and he goes, it's Niv Mizzet Firemind. And I went, okay. And that's how I built Niv,
Yeah,
was because
sure.
I just asked and he was like, this is the most powerful. And I'm like, well, this strange man is telling me it's powerful, so it must be true. And I don't do that anymore.
Niv Firemind's very good.
Yeah. It was
Uh,
like 2015, I think, that I asked that question too. So
Still, like people have moved to Niv Perun,
yeah.
but for the most part, that the 99 of that deck has mostly stayed the same.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
it's really funny too, because the graduation for me, I started out with Niv Farmine, and one of my favorite decks is the Locust God, and I think that's
that's a
kind of like a
very
little
natural evolution for
right.
that deck. there's going to be a different flavoring to it, but the central strategy is still the same: do
Oh
damage
yeah,
and draw cards. It's just
exactly.
how you're doing it is a big way that it changes.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people can consider when, they might not necessarily vibe with the commander, but they vibe with the strategy.
Yeah.
Sometimes just changing the commander and then changing that like 10 or 12 cards that commander wants to kind of round out their specific text box makes
Hmm.
the biggest difference in the world.
Oh, 1,000%. Like, there are some people who I feel like hate Locust God, but they're like super into Nekuzar. Or
Hmm.
like there are certain people who are like, I really like token decks. I don't like Risk the Redeemed, but I really love me like what? Like a Tristani. Tristani makes
Hmm.
tokens, right? Like they like it's
Tristani
just like a,
populates.
yeah, populates. Like there's like, for instance, some people might be like, oh, I like populate because it only gives me one token at a time, whereas with Reese, I can just like board sweep essentially with tokens. So it's like,
This gets interesting because I have a Girid deck in
yeah.
particular, and Reese and Girid are like two peas in a pod. The difference with Reese and a like populate commander like Tristani and Girid is
Mhm.
Reese has the double all of your stuff in the
Yeah.
command zone versus Tristani and Girid that have to put second harvest or the token doubler in their 99. And I mean
Yeah.
you probably put the token doubler and second harvest in Reese's 99, but not having instant access to it at all times is
Mhm.
going to change the play experience and the play pattern for the deck. It's a little bit more in the old spirit of Commander where it wasn't happening all the time. It would happen every once in a while. So there was a novelty to these very powerful effects.
Yeah.
And I mean, Reese is a very old card. Like Reese is from Shadowmoor or
Yep.
that Lorwyn
Shadow
block.
War.
So,
I
so
love Reese.
Reese has been around for over a
Hot minute.
decade
Yeah.
at this point. And I think that there's something to be said about that too. Like, some commanders are just you've seen it for a while, and some people just want that change of pace.
Yeah.
It's like this used to be a Reese deck, but now it's Tristani. Or this Tristani deck that used to be a Reese deck is now my Girid deck because there's
Hmm.
some cool red creatures like I wanted to play Mirror March
Yeah.
or the different cards like Flame Shadow Conjuring. Like those interest me. And a
Hmm.
lot of times people will, from my experience recently, there's been a movement to just remove colors from their decks and like move from this trend of every deck is a 3-color deck down to trying to make a deck a 2-color deck or a monocolor deck because you don't really see those that often anymore.
Yeah. I
Uh,
would actually say that that's very similar to something I've noticed with myself. I used to be super into three color. I felt like three color was like, my jam. It felt like a good comfy place for me. Now I feel very uncomfortable in the three color section. I feel like two color is where I'm most comfortable at.
mm-hmm.
Monocolored is like a good starting point for me, but like I don't know, there's something about uh field
There's a
colors
paralysis of
displacement.
choice when building your deck at
Yep.
3-color, 4-color, 5-color. When you have like 60, 80, or 100% of the card pool at your disposal,
Yeah.
your deck tends to fill itself out a lot more quicker than it would if it was a monocolor deck or a 2-color deck. Because you just pick all the best cards for your strategy in all those different colors.
I would say like with Sisse, normally I would be like, oh, Sisse gives me paralysis of choice. But like the thing is because the theme is so limited, I
Hmm.
that kind of is kind of removed from me because like my card
Yeah.
pool is already so limited. But like I remember one time I tried to build like a Yagantha deck on stream, like literally a year, 2 years ago, maybe. I don't know, time is weird. And I remember being like, how in the hell can I choose? There's so many things. That was so, and then I found out Coalition Victory was banned and I got sad.
So like Jeggy in particular, like because it's 5-color and it kind of just makes mana. Like you can do anything with it, but the thing that I've seen with Jeggy is what if every creature in the Jeggy deck had an activated ability? So it's just an all activated abilities deck.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you build around like Jeskai Ascendancy or something like that. Like finding that very, very, very hyper specific theme where there's probably only like 200 cards to choose from in
Yeah.
total is a major, major, major way to just find a non-linear evolution for a deck. Like you might not want to take apart your Jaggy deck, but you want to do something different with it.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that specifically because over here, oh God, I just dropped Rick on the floor. That's like a $40 card. I cannot
That's
roll my
like
chair.
$60 now.
He's around. Okay,
feel like it doubles in price every other day.
I'm gonna kick it across the floor because it's next to my wheel on my wheelie chair. Okay, Rick is
R.I.P. Rick.
Rick. So this matters. I have a Morphon deck, right? Well, it's not even built yet, but I'm in the process of building this Morphon deck. And it's
Mm-hmm.
actually going to be a theme deck. I used to have a tribal deck back in the day. I took it apart because it got boring after a while. This Morphon deck is going to be themed around the movie The Thing. And so that is a very limiting theme in itself because I want every single card to make a reference to the movie. So, yeah, it's going to be like humans, but I'm limiting myself to only 12 humans in the deck because
Because
there are
there's only
12
12
men.
characters. Yeah, right.
Yeah, everything else is going to be changelings. And then all my lands are going to be snow lands. And like it has to be very theme specific. Otherwise, it's not going to work for me. Like, I have cards like, oh gosh, like I mean like Faceless Haven, like they're in the Arctic. You have like Game Trail Changeling, you know, it changes into a deer in the movie, the thing changes into a
Mm-hmm.
dog. I mean, you have like mass hysteria, which is literally what what people experience. Actually, it's mass appeal, but like crippling fear, like these are all themed things that work with this concept of a deck where I could just build, you know, every single creature as a human and then just do that. That's boring to me though. I want to limit myself by making a deck themed around a movie. Or I saw somewhere on Twitter, Zebek said that she was going to do a deck where every single card in the deck had to have a shade of pink, like a specific Pantone shade of pink, which good luck because for some reason magic artists don't like to put pinks in their art, but I digress. But
Certain ones do though. So you're very limited
and we
on the
love
artists
them.
that you can use.
And
Yeah.
and we love them for doing it.
Shout out Johannes Voss.
Oh gosh,
Love your
yes.
color palettes.
Give me more pinks, please. I would see so many purples.
So that's like definitely, yeah, I mean that's definitely something you can do. It's definitely time consuming though. Like
Yeah.
there's a big time investment for these theme decks or these, hyper restrictive decks.
Yeah.
When I first started playing Commander, I was incredibly busy. I mean, I'm still incredibly busy these days, but
Mm.
arguably like more so with like more mentally taxing work.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to evolve my decks or make changes to my decks, I was thinking like, what are quick, simple things that I can either add or remove to my decks to spice them up or evolve them into something that I vibe with a little bit more. And one of the things that I found was decks that don't necessarily have tutors, but still just feel incredibly consistent.
Mhm.
Um, like lands decks in particular. A lands deck wants you to do one thing: just play lands and get more
Yeah.
lands and do more lands. So I had a Windgrace deck for the longest time, uh, and I found it was too good at doing the thing,
Yeah.
but there wasn't with what I was trying to do with like Valakut and Scapeshift and stuff like that. There was really only one way to build that. And I tried, just seeing, okay, what happens if I take the fetch lands out of my decks? And that's something that I don't play fetch lands anymore. I find that I like the jankiness of a jankier mana base, and
Yeah.
having mana fixing as a land drop rather than a spell or like an activated ability on a creature is a lot more interesting to me as a brewer and a player. I like that challenge.
Yeah.
There was a sentiment for the longest time. A lot of people were saying like fetch lands are fantastic in Commander. Like you should be running them. Like no, you don't need them. And there came this movement of, hey, actually you don't need fetch lands. But a lot of people weren't putting their deck building where their mouth was.
Yeah.
And I was one of those adopters that said, hey, you don't need fetch lands. Actually, it's a lot better to not be playing fetch lands, especially if you're playing FNM or playing under a time crunch or playing on a
Hmm.
stream where you're needing to entertain, and that downtime of fetching and searching and everything like that
Yeah.
kind of derails the vibe of the game that you're playing. Like,
Hmm.
just land go is a lot more engaging and keeps you a lot more attentive than play a fetch, crack a fetch, spend 2 minutes looking for that one specific land
Yeah.
because you have that order of operations in your hand, in your head, to
Hmm.
just say, I need to go grab Hollowed Fountain and I need to
Yeah.
shock in Hollowed Fountain so I can do this. And
Yeah.
we've found workarounds for that, just doing shortcutting.
Yeah.
But those time crunch cards, I find myself not running anymore, and I've evolved those out of my decks. It's usually at the behest and the detriment of you that I find a time crunch card that I don't enjoy anymore,
Hmm.
like the fabled Thousand Year Storm game.
I don't want to talk about that. That
The
was so
It was
so
cool. It was so cool,
it was so cool.
but
I
it
felt
did
war
nothing.
torn. I felt
It did
war torn after
nothing.
that game.
Yeah. Uh, the,
But I feel like the same could be said for tutors too. Like
mhm.
I remember there was that article back from whenever brain I don't remember where somebody was like tutors are bad. Let me tell you why. And I was kind of indignant with that at first. I'm like, this just feels like a very mean spirited thing. I was like, it felt mean spirited. But then I don't know. As I've grown in my deck building, I feel like I've done the same thing where I used to be like, no, I hate fetches. They're unaffordable. I can't afford them. I'm not going to run them. And then I started like, being more invested, and I was like, okay, I'll run a couple of
I
fetches.
mean, that's a big
And
part of it. Like, if you're playing like a 3 color deck, to have all the
yeah,
fetches, because people were big on like off color fetches in their deck.
I
So
hate off color. Oh,
you're basically
sorry.
saying, hey,
Ugh.
your land base at a bare minimum is $400. Like,
Yeah,
that
I
is
hate that.
incredibly financially restrictive.
It is, especially back before they were reprinted. And I mean,
Yeah.
they're still expensive now. I consider any card to be above $10 expensive, in my personal opinion. And I think they're still very unaffordable, but like that was the thing. And when I used to when I used to have my deck building stream, people would be like, "Hey, you run your fetches," and they would be like, "Run all of the ones that you can run." I'm like, "No, if I'm going to run a fetch, I'm going to at least, not even at least, I'm going to at most run the on color fetch. That's it." And I feel like with deck building, and correct me if you think I'm like inaccurate about this, but I feel like I feel like a lot of Magic players start at one place, like right here, like you can see my hand, and then they're like, okay, now I'm here, midway through their Magic career. And as they get a little bit more seasoned and they come like the most invested they are, they're back at the beginning where they were. I feel very weird. I feel like that's where I am.
I think you're onto something here, though. There's something to be said. At a certain point, people kind of lose sight on the reason that they were playing in the first place, or the
Yeah.
reason that they were building the way they were, or intending to build the way they were in the first place.
Yeah.
In the push for optimization and doing as much as possible as quick as possible, people, maybe lost sight on the fact that the reason why they liked playing Commander in the first place is they loved playing big dumb 10 drops and like just big unwieldy niche cards that they otherwise couldn't play.
Yeah.
And as you've optimized your deck, or as you've added tutors and all the dorks, all the fetches to fix the mana, these otherwise inaccessible Wooburg cards are now incredibly easy to cast. Or
Yeah.
these
The
inaccessible,
ultimatums.
yeah, the ultimatums used to
Yeah.
be like something you would rarely ever see.
Uh-huh.
And now, like the Sultai one, Emergent Ultimatum, I see it fairly often. Or
Yeah.
the
Ruinous. I see Ruinous up frequently
yeah,
actually. It's
yeah,
weird.
oh yeah, that used to be a card, like, even for your stereotypical Mardu deck, it just never really played.
Yeah.
And that's one of the newer ones that came out with Ikoria. Like, it only just came out in Ikoria, but
Mhm.
Ikoria kind of coincides, with the beginning of lockdown and the beginning of people playing a lot more Commander, a lot more
Yeah.
Magic in general, and people just got pushed towards
Mhm.
optimization. So, like, casting red, red, white, 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 black, black 5 or 6 years ago It's a
Yeah.
lot harder sentimentally than it is to cast now. Like there's just so much more fixing that people are
Well,
running in their decks.
treasures. We have treasures
Yeah,
now.
I mean treasures alone, I think completely changed the game for
I
all of
think
these
so too.
spells.
What used
So
to be impossible is now pretty fairly
trivial,
easy.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a smothering tide out. Cool. You're good. Dockside,
Like
you're easy.
the sheer existence of Smothering Tide, Dockside, Professional Facebreaker, even,
Yeah.
or
Card advantage on a stick. I mean,
yeah,
it's crazy.
any of those cards, and those cards are very affordable. All things considered, Dockside and Smothering Tithe aside, all
Yeah.
the other like more innocent treasure making cards that are budget friendly have
Hmm.
made these cards accessible, and I think that's really awesome as a like from a macro level on the format. I love
Hmm.
seeing big, crazy, unique effects being run more often. But when they're run really often, they don't feel big and crazy and exciting. Because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's a ruinous ultimatum. That's just a good card that
Yeah.
we're playing Mardu, so we play that card. I think people have lost sight on these more unique cards over time, and like you said, people kind of go back to where they were
When they first started.
evolutionarily
Yeah.
when they started playing the format. So you're seeing you're seeing old border only decks. You're seeing Azusa decks. You're seeing Lin Civi decks. You're seeing
Hmm.
Hazazen Tamar decks.
Yeah.
Granted, Hazazen Tamar is like $300, so people are playing the new Hazazen Tamar and doing something spiritually similar.
Yeah.
Uh, the nostalgia of Commander. I feel like that the evolution of the format is at the point where nostalgia is back and nostalgia is popular again.
I would say that I feel like with how optimized the format has become in certain aspects, a lot of people are wanting to struggle on
Mm-hmm.
purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and I like that. And I know that sounds very weird, but like that brings us back to the whole concept of like challenge level, like picking a challenge. Like you could like, how the hell am I gonna brew a Taniwha deck? Or how am I going to build like the this random legend from like cons that's like a mono red dash commander. I think it's like something bell striker or whatever, but like
Zergo.
it's yeah, Zergo bells. It's like how do I do these weird things? How do I limit myself in this way? Because like the whole reason why I was drawn to Commander was I had so many options to do stupid things, weird things. Like I mean, like even with new cards, I think you can still do that in a way that's still challenging and interesting. Like there's now a mono white Griffin Commander where you can have a deck theme that's all about Griffins. I mean, like there's so many ways to do things where like if you want to like have a Griffin deck, but you don't want to run Maskwood Nexus, that in itself there is a very interesting challenge for you to do because you deprive yourself of running pretty much anything,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is kind of fun and cool and interesting.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought here.
There's
There's this idea that niche weird thing that was once something that needed to be jumped through hoops for is now accessible and easy. And the novelty has kind of worn off. But at the same
yeah,
time, hey, that really weird, cool thing that you wanted to do, you can do that, and you
yeah,
don't have to struggle if you don't want to. There's two sides to that same coin, and I think both sides are equally valid and equally interesting. And the fact that they both exist allows both types of players to be satisfied. And I think at the end of the
yeah,
day, the accessibility to those ideas is something that has really evolved in the way that I look at the format and I look at
hmm,
decks. Like if I don't want to struggle with this deck, I don't have to.
yeah,
I can play the tutors, I can play the fetches, I can play the card, I can play the Chulane in my command zone, I can play the Corvold
hmm,
in my command zone,
yeah,
but I don't have to. And I think that's something that we have to preach is a valid way of looking at things. Like you don't have to struggle if you don't want to.
yeah,
It's cool to do the optimized, like very succinct thing.
yeah.
I love that. I have my Primal Surge deck that is my way of scratching that itch.
Same with me with my Gitrog. I have a Gitrog deck. I know the ins and outs of it, and that's what I consider like my
Hmm.
cool, like, to get the edge on that. Like I have a Cadric Super Friends deck that's Boros. I could I could optimally play
Words are hard.
I could optimally play Atraxa. I mean, there's no red in there, but that is like the objectively best choice.
The red planeswalkers are okay, but like Teferi
Yeah,
and
to
Nissa
fair. Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff, like you don't have to do that.
yeah. And so I was like, yeah, I could do 4 color Super Friends or even 5 color Super Friends with Sisay. Or what if I chose token copies of Planeswalkers with
Yeah.
Cadric that may or may not stay, depending. Like it's just fun to like take a stupid theme and roll with it. But like I feel like when I first started playing Magic, I wouldn't have been, you know, brave enough to attempt that. So I
Hmm.
feel like, you know, even though I feel like I'm going back to where I started in terms of my sort of deck building mantra and my goal to play what makes me happy. Like right now I'm fiddling with oh my god, with Ignacia, which is an illegal commander, by the way. You're technically not allowed to do that. I'm gonna do it because it's gonna be one of 2 illegal cards, but that's what I would have done when I first started playing. But you know, maybe like a year ago, I probably wouldn't have done it because I wanted to adhere to the rules in a way more strict fashion, or I just felt like it was cheating to me or whatever. Like there's a number of different ways, but for me, I feel like the way that I have tackled building commander decks, the way I've tackled my personal mantra with decks in general or commanders in general is I want to struggle but in a fun way.
You put it perfectly earlier. Struggling on purpose is cool, and
Yeah.
struggling on purpose is fun.
Yeah.
And I will add the addendum: you don't have to if you don't want to.
Oh, 1,000%.
If your play group is the type of play group that you like doing powerful things quickly and consistently, and you guys are enjoying doing that, I love that for you.
Yeah.
I really do. What I think is really fun is if you're trying to spice things up with your playgroup, have a discussion amongst your playgroup, like why, why do we think things are getting stale? Are like are things too consistent? And then say, okay, next time that we get together, let's cut all the fetches and all of the efficient tutors from our decks,
Yeah.
but play the decks as normal otherwise. And
Yeah.
sometimes a deck might not work, and like that's okay. That deck might just not work for this experiment.
Yeah.
But fine tuning your play experience as a play group is very, very easy because there are so many different things that you can change and change very easily about Commander and about the format. And that's what's so great about Commander is
Yeah.
everything's up to you. I mean, even the ban list. The ban list is a suggestion for trusted, like on the same page group play.
Yeah.
Play prime time and experience prime time.
Mhm.
Play all the power cards if you really want to. And you can evolve your experience that way.
I definitely think Commander in itself is a privileged format in the way that we
Hmm.
have the ability to do that, where most other formats, actually, I think every other format doesn't really have the ability to do it unless you're straight up
Literally
kitchen
every other
table.
format. Yeah.
Yeah. Every other format has some form of rules that are very strict in setting code. And I've said this before publicly, but I really appreciate that Commander is it feels like the rules aren't made out of metal or they're not very rigid. They're made out of bamboo. They can kind of bend. It's a naturally bending format. It ebbs
Yeah.
and flows.
Hmm.
It's flexible. And I feel like we're very privileged to kind of have that format where we can argue the rules in a way that's healthy and fun. We can change our rules depending on if we play with somebody from Milwaukee or if we play with somebody from Ohio, you know?
The chances of playing an ungame of Commander or a no ban list game of Commander are a lot higher and are going to happen a lot more often than like no ban list modern. Like you
Yeah.
would need a very specific group or a very specific event with very specific goals for
Yeah.
something like that. Whereas like you can just text your buddy right now, hey,
Mhm.
no ban list Commander tonight, my place, 8 o'clock, BYOB. See you
Yeah.
then.
Bring bring your brooms.
Yeah, bring your own Commander brews.
Yeah.
Like that's all, but that's all it takes.
Yeah. I mean, my LGS is currently running a Pauper Commander night, but in a different way. So you can every single card has to be like common,
Hmm.
but your commander can be an uncommon, and it doesn't even have to be a legend. It just has to be an uncommon card.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
I have oh my gosh, I believe if I'm so sorry if I'm getting this wrong, but the LGS owner Charla, shout out to Charla. I think her commander is Corpse Jack Menace. Um,
Oh, that's a fun one. That
but every
that
single
gets
card in her deck is
dangerous.
common.
Yeah.
It does, but she's very limited because of
Hmm.
that. Or like, I don't know. I just think that is really cool that a shop can be like, these are the rules. We're doing this.
Yeah.
You get to win a teeny little trophy, and the trophy has a little goat on top of it. Super cute. But that's fun. That's cool. I don't think you could do that for modern. Or
The one of the biggest perks for Commander is, and one of the biggest like safety nets that Commander has is it's opt in, opt out at all times.
yes.
Everything is based on mutual consent,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not something that I really considered as a an early deck builder. Like I was
Oh
just
yeah.
trying to. I played at a shop that it was a little sweatier. Like people were playing strong, good stuff, so you felt compelled to build strong, good stuff decks. And at a certain point, it did take it took the shop owner or some of the regulars to say like, hey, let's switch things up, let's do something
Mhm.
different. And it really expanded people's horizons and opened people's minds to all these other different possibilities. And I don't think that I'd be the brewer and the player I am today without David saying like, hey, let's just switch things up and see what happens. And it turns
Yeah.
out people were saying like, hey, this is what I've wanted all along, or hey, this is something that I've missed for the longest time. And
Hmm.
I think sentiments like that are something that sometimes they require a little bit of work to make
Yeah.
work, but once you do it once, that next time gets that much easier. Building that nostalgic deck the first time, you do have to do all the work going through your old bins and everything like that, finding your old cards or digging up your old deck list on Deck Stats, if anyone remembers that website.
Tapped out for me. That mine
Hmm.
was tapped out.
Sometimes there is a little bit of work to find those decks, but once you find it and once you build that first deck, it's like, oh wait, now I want to build my buddy Johnny's like old combo deck that they played when we were like 14 years old. I think that's you have me thinking about all like the old decks that I used to play, and like now I want to build these new decks that I want to play, but in that old style. And I
Yeah,
think
I think it's fun
that's
to revisit that.
yeah
Go to your roots. See where you started.
ties back to last week where there's just some decks that we could never get to work, and maybe all it takes is a shift in perspective.
I
And
I I genuinely think that's what it is. It's the shift in perspective. And here's the deal: a year from now, I can guarantee that we're going to have differing opinions about this, and that
oh
is
yeah,
perfectly fine,
absolutely.
natural, and okay. We could probably go back to saying that fetch lands are the best, and you have to run them, and if you're not, then you're playing Commander wrong. I mean, who knows? It doesn't.
I have started running fetch lands again,
Yeah,
but they
it's
are in
winter.
the artist proof deck because based on the restrictive nature of that deck and Sam Burley doing a lot of fetches
Yeah,
recently, those are just cards that I can get. Looking at cards that you would never run or just didn't like running before in a shift of perspective might change your opinion on them.
yeah.
So it's something to think about.
It's really funny that you say that because I got a secret lair diabolic tutor from my brain dead purchase.
Hmm.
Somebody, a fantastic, beautiful individual, was able to snag me a hat from Brain Dead at Magic 30 Vegas because I wasn't able to attend. And with it came a secret lair diabolic tutor. Diabolic tutor is not a great tutor. It's a 4 mana tutor. I have secret lair tutors of Grim Tutor, and I have a judge promo of a demonic tutor. But like, I really want to run that diabolic tutor because it's a
Yeah.
secret lair and the art is sick, and there's not many of them out there currently. And I'm like, it's objectively not a good card, but I really want to play it anyway. And I think
Everyone
that's
has that
cool.
objectively bad card, quote unquote bad card that
Yeah.
they love, and like my favorite decks are the decks that are built around making those quote unquote bad cards the best card.
Yeah.
And then that's not something that I did in 2016, 2017. I would never have tried to do that.
I said this the other day when I was talking about my Ignacio deck. In all honesty, play what brings you joy, do what brings you
Yeah.
joy, and be open and honest. I remember I know this is going like a little off base for just a brief moment, but I feel like it's a good thing to end on is you know, Kess was talking about, not being really secretive with like what your deck does and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, yeah,
We could
magic
do
is
a
it.
whole episode on that.
We really could, and I feel like we should, but
Oh, there's the sneak peek for next week.
there we go. But at the end of the day, it's a communal format. You want to have people leave feeling like they had a good time, even if they lost. And I feel like that your deck, the way you build your deck, the way you interact with your deck does that. Like there have been decks that I've taken apart where they're strong, they're objectively good, they're powerful, and they were good. Like my MEL deck was killer, but I took it apart because I felt like I was making people unhappy every time they left my stream because it was just pretty consistently oppressive. And I
Hmm.
didn't really like doing that anymore. And so, like, I'm not saying, oh, if your deck is powerful, take it apart. Not at all. I'm saying like having that conversation. I think at the end of the day, it always boils down to having that pregame conversation, having that rule zero conversation. Rule zero doesn't always encompass, hey, I'm running an illegal commander. It's, hey, this deck runs 6 tutors
Yeah.
and 7 stacks pieces. Like I feel like I would want to know that if I was going to get
Yeah.
invested in a pod. And like if you like that deck building style, cool. If you like playing vanilla creatures, cool. Talk about it. Be
There's
open.
a time and place for every card, and unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately,
Yeah.
it is the onus is on the players at the table to figure out what's going to mesh well for the experience that they're going after.
Could not agree
There are
more.
some, suggestions, and the philosophy, the commander philosophy document is a suggestion. They believe that that is the best experience for commander. But if you find yourself differing from that and you find like-minded people that agree with you,
Mhm.
great. But that's the type of thing where you want to be open and you want to be, you don't have to divulge every single possible secret and lay out the entire deck and get individual improvement for
Oh
everything.
yeah, of course.
But you should probably tell your opponent if you're running a stasis.
Yeah, yeah,
Think
genuinely.
that's really all Cass is trying to say. There's your sneak peek at next week. But you know, I think people go through this evolution as a player and as a deck builder where they're not necessarily cognizant of their opponents when they're building their deck. And I think
Mhm.
it's becoming a lot more common as a baseline, to be more cognizant and appreciative and understanding of their opponent's time and
Yeah.
experience when they're building their deck. And that's a very like macro level idea that I'm glad is a macro level of thinking
Mhm.
for the format these days.
Yeah.
But I know at one point as a brewer, I was not that brewer, and I'm
Yeah.
glad I'm not that person anymore.
It's definitely a process. That's why I say like when you deck build, when you play Magic, you're always going to be going through cycles and stages. I don't think you ever stop going through
Hmm.
those
If you
as a Magic player.
if you stop, then
You probably stopped playing the game altogether.
or
In my
or
opinion.
maybe you do want to sit and reevaluate things,
Yeah.
because the last thing you want is for things to feel stale and for you not to be having fun, because it is a game.
Mhm.
It's the whole
Yeah.
point.
Alrighty, friends. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Bad at Magic. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chase, also known as Mana Curves. I'm a Commander content creator. I stream Paper Commander Thursdays, Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern on my Twitch. I do deck building Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I also write articles for Star City Games.
And I'm at EK Plays Cards on all the things. I work behind the scenes with all of your favorite content creators like Shivanbot and Ailey and Olivia of Elder Dragon Hijinks. So if you're supporting them, you're supporting me. You can support this show by leaving a like and a comment and subscribing and all that kind of stuff, because you've made it this far in the episode, which means that it's not much of an ask to have you do one little extra little bit of a thing. You can find this show on Spotify, Stitcher, all your favorite podcast platforms of choice. But you can also find this show on YouTube, and that's a big thing that we've been trying to focus on, is having the show be visually engaging. And we talk about a lot of cards on the show, so being able to look at the cards while you listen to us blab on for an hour is an awesome way to round out the experience. If you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button and all that kind of stuff.